I want to welcome you back, and I want to thank everyone who participated yesterday. I've been thrilled. I think it's been a great gathering. The energy that you all have brought has made it work. Right. This morning, we're going to hear from Gretchen Goldman and Lyla June. Dr. Goldman, is the Climate Change Research and Technology Director at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And before working at DOT, she served as the White House in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy as Assistant Director for Environment Science, Engineering, Policy, and Justice, and where she led the federal efforts on scientific integrity, indigenous knowledge, climate and equity, air quality, and environmental justice. I won't read her whole bio. It's in the app. I urge you to look at it. But I did. I felt compelled to tell her that she shares with my daughter the big red tradition. Graduated, got a BS in atmospheric science from Cornell. I'd also like to introduce Lyla June, who is an indigenous musician, author, and community organizer. Of Diné and Cheyenne and European lineage. Her doctoral research focused on the way in which pre-colonial indigenous nations have shaped large regions of Turtle Island to produce the food systems for humans and non-humans. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Goldman.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone being here. I know it's very early on a Saturday morning, so I appreciate all of you being here. And I was thinking about the tomorrow's talk yesterday on self-care and joy, and so I'm glad to see so many people, because I think for not everyone very early on the Saturday would bring a lot of joy, so appreciate that opportunity. So I wanted to start with talking about where I come from on this issue. And so it's been, I've really appreciated being here and being able to think about what does joy in this work mean for me, and how I come to this issue. And so first I wanted to just tell a quick story about one thing that has brought me a lot of joy in my career is bringing my whole self to a space, and I've appreciated that at this conference as well. And so I wanted to share a quick story about a time that I did that, and millions of people saw it, which is in 2020. I was parenting and working, and it was when children were home with the pandemic, and everything was fairly chaotic. And I was working from home, and I got a request to be on CNN on Wolf Blitzer's Situation Room, which is, what they do often in sort of rapid response scenarios where they need an expert to come in and just talk about a breaking news event. And so I did that from my house, as everyone was doing, working from home at that time in 2020. And I did the interview on the show, and then after it came out, I decided to share what my behind the scenes looked like, so how I was in that interview. And it was my work from home scenario, so I was just in my living room, which is completely covered in toys because I have 2 young children, and to get the right camera height and lighting, I was sort of crammed into this little part of my house, and there was a chair on top of a table to get the camera height, and it just looked really silly compared to the CNN shot, which looked a little more professional. And so I decided to tweet out on Twitter that side by side of what it looked like on Situation Room and what it looked like in my living room. And I thought it was just sort of funny, and a few people might like it, but it turns out that a lot of people really liked it, and it resonated with a lot of people, and it ended up going viral, and it just kept going in terms of getting attention. I got it's up to 25 million views on Twitter. I was in the newspaper in Japan. I was on TV in India. Good Morning America, NPR, Glamour Woman of the Year. It went into this huge thing, and it really taught me that bringing your whole self, because at that moment I brought my whole self more than I could have ever realized, because when 25 million people see your living room, they will notice every little thing that is in your living room. So they figured out I had a Cornell degree because of something on the shelf. They figured out I had spent time in Rwanda because of the art on the wall. Like, it was every little thing you people dissected. And so, the point of telling that story is that after that, I realized that you can gain a lot from bringing your whole self to a space. And after that, I felt much more empowered to be able to be a parent and a professional in the same spaces, because I'm in DC and Washington, DC, and that's not always the sort of cultural context there of being able to be a parent and be a mom and talk about that and bring that to professional spaces. And so after that, it really empowered me to do that. And so with that, I wanted to share just briefly where I come from on a lot of these issues. So I spent a decade at the Union of Concerned Scientists doing advocacy work around science and policy, and that included climate and environmental justice issues, as well as other kinds of science and decision-making, focused largely at the federal level. And one thing that really brought me joy in doing a lot of that work was thinking about connections. And so I'm trained as a scientist. My PhD is environmental engineering, and I really enjoyed being at that intersection of thinking about advocacy and policy and science, and how do you bring all those together, because often we see these communities more siloed, and there's not quite and there's often a lot of opportunity to sort of bridge that gap. And so I really appreciated that work and being able to sort of come up with ideas and think big and advance work and think about possibilities in terms of science and environmental justice and policy in ways that hadn't happened yet. So that work gave me, shaped a lot of my thinking on how, where the opportunity was and where there were gaps, and what was and wasn't happening around leveraging science for decisions around environmental justice. And then I got called up to the White House in 2021 to advance a lot of that work from the White House side. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about the work that I did there. And then just in the last 6 months, I moved over to the Department of Transportation to do more on the implementation side, thinking about working on how to advance a lot of the work that I was doing in the White House previously. So these are sort of the different roles I've played and the different perspectives I've taken, and so I wanted to provide that context for this. And one thing I wanted to really emphasize with this was what I've sort of always seen as sort of this often gap between what we understand as scientists, as academics, as people thinking about studying the problems of in society, and then sometimes what's a disconnect in terms of the actions that we take and the decisions that are made on the policy side at different levels of government, and what that opportunity exists. And so one thing I always find really striking is the degree to which, when you look at scientific data, that you can see the inequities. And I'm sure I do not need to explain that in detail to this audience, but I would just emphasize that it's often, I have found it really helpful in scientific spaces to just be able to say that when we look across metrics and we look at the data, we can see these inequities, and we see them across different parameters, across different kinds of issues, and it happens again and again. This is from a US EPA climate change report from 2021, looking at different climate impacts and the impacts that they'll have on different groups. So this is one of many documentation of the issue, and so just really emphasizing that we need to always come back to this and remember that those are the outcomes are not equally distributed, and so that we need to be considering that when we're looking at policies and decisions and funding and all of the different layers and activities within the federal government of how to think about addressing these issues and tackling those inequities. So with that, I wanted to shift to some of the work that I did in the White House and talk a little bit about what I see as the opportunity here. So I was in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. This is the component of the White House that does a lot of the science and technology issues for the federal interagency, and so you sort of get the opportunity both to sort of be connected to and think bigger about the science and technology and research contributions to things, while also being responsive and carrying out the priorities of the administration. And so it's sort of an interesting place to sit. And when I got there, there wasn't a ton happening within that component around science and environmental justice, and I worked to try to see where those opportunities are. And one really important one. So this is the first executive order in this administration, 1408, which launched the Justice 40 program and several other environmental justice work that happened under this administration and launched this larger effort. And so there's now hundreds of programs across the federal government advancing Justice 40 and looking to prioritize delivering climate and clean energy investments to disadvantaged communities. So that's a big ongoing effort. And then while I was at OSTP, though, I thought more about the opportunity that's presented by the federal research enterprise. And so across federal agencies, there's this huge science infrastructure. So people and places and research happening at different parts of the government that are really focused on technical elements, so data and research and science in different ways. And this hadn't been the primary focus of 1408, but then that gap was remedied when 14096 came out. So this executive order that revitalized and reaffirmed the nation's commitments to environmental justice activities. And this did a lot of new things and a lot of new, launched new efforts to bolster the 1994 EO, and additionally, there is one piece of it that I'd want to call out that I worked on is the Section 5 of that, which bolsters the role of federal science data and research to inform environmental justice decision-making across the government. And so this new executive order brings science in a bigger way, and it's an opportunity for us to think about what that could look like. So more specifically, one of the tasks that it requires that we're working on now is to develop a coordinated federal strategy to identify and address gaps in science data and research related to environmental justice. So this is an action that's happening now, and I wanted to call it out for this audience. If there's any opportunity or any interest in informing that, in my opinion, this is a big opportunity for us to think about, what do we really want from science and data and research, and where are the opportunities to do better on that when it comes to environmental justice decision-making in the federal government. So there's a QR code there if you want to take you to more information. This is a request for information that's out now, and I'm happy to talk with anyone about it because we're really interested in getting input on this right now, and I think it's a big opportunity to think about how we can really leverage and shift federal resources when it comes to science and research and data. How can those be better leveraged for all the work that's already happening or could happen when it comes to environmental justice decision-making at the federal level? And so the other big White House piece that I wanted to call out that I worked on was around production of government-wide guidance on indigenous knowledge. And I think this is, I'll just flag for this group, I think this is a good opportunity as a reminder that opportunities just sometimes come to do something, even if it wasn't what we anticipated. So I didn't go to the White House thinking I was going to work on this, but there was an alignment of opportunities, and it was just a good time to do it. And so we really wanted to take it as far as we could. And so this was an opportunity to think about what does it look like to recognize and include and consider Indigenous knowledge in different forms of federal decisions. So this came to my desk, and there was a team, an Indigenous knowledge team, at my office, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and we were basically handed a blank piece of paper. And this doesn't happen all the time in the federal government, but there was a lot. We were needed to figure out what would be included in this, what should it include, what should it look like, what is and what isn't the federal role when it comes to thinking about Indigenous knowledge in this context. And so we had an interagency committee that focused on this. We did several tribal consultations and listening sessions and showed up in different spaces to try to get as much input on this as we could and make sure that we were listening and learning and taking inputs from tribal nations and Indigenous peoples to make sure that we got it right, because it was new and we hadn't done this before, and it was a big opportunity to think about it. And so then last year we were able to release this government-wide guidance on Indigenous knowledge at the White House Tribal Nations Summit, which happened last December in Washington, D.C. And now there is people across the federal government that are working on implementing this at federal agencies. And so it's really an opportunity to think about, how can we do better on this, and where can we really, what is the federal role in thinking about how to do this better? And so that's one piece that is something new, and this never existed before up until now, and it's now being implemented across the federal government. And then, how am I doing on time? Should I be wrapping? I'll tell me if you want me to stop. But just briefly, lastly, I wanted to talk about this huge opportunity that's presented by the legislative success that we've had recently on a lot of these issues. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest climate investment in history. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure, and the CHIPS and Science Act, which includes historic investments in U.S. manufacturing and advancing industrial policy. And so these are sort of the kind of newspaper headlines of what you would say about these pieces of legislation. But the thing I would just emphasize here is just how big these are, because I think it's not... it's sort of hard to appreciate when we're just talking at the high level, but it really launches and presents and shifts resources in really big ways that we haven't experienced before. And so that's a huge opportunity to do it. And that led to a lot of the work that I'm doing now at the Department of Transportation, is implementing a lot of this work, because we have this opportunity now to, given the priorities of this administration and given this unprecedented climate and clean energy and environmental justice investments that are happening, to do a lot right now. And so I think a lot about that sort of opportunity. And so I'm really focused on doing that implementation work and thinking about what can we really leverage in this moment to do that work. And then I'll just close by saying that one thing that brings me joy and sort of motivation for doing a lot of this work is thinking about the next generation and how the world that they'll inherit. And my children, my youngest son is 5, and this summer we took a road trip in an RV. And we had to fill up the gas tank on the RV, and we stopped at the gas station, and he said, "Oh my gosh, what is that awful smell?" And we realized he had never smelled gasoline. Like, he had never had the experience of going to a gas station, because we have an electric car and an electric bike. And so he had never even had that experience of sort of being in a gas station. And, it just made me really see that the next generation is going to grow up in a different world, and they're going to have different contexts and expectations for how things are and how they could be. And so I think, now we can continue to do that hard work of making some of these shifts, but there's a huge opportunity. And I think they'll get to grow up in a world with joy in a different way and having new opportunities for all of them. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, and the point you ended on is exactly right. I mean, there's a meme going around, right, that says, what if you want to really shock your kids, tell them you're older than Google, right? Right. And I have to tell them I'm older than the internet. Which practically makes me a fossil. But what it also means is there's a world that we hadn't even imagined, right? And what the energy yesterday and today is about is creating the space for that new world to emerge and emerge properly. So now I'd like to introduce Lyla June. As I said, she's an Indigenous musician, author, community organizer, doing graduate work at Stanford in human ecology and Indigenous pedagogy, and focuses, as I said, on food systems and for humans and non-humans, and integrates art and music and serious scholarship. And with that, I'd like to introduce Lyla June.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you very
I
much.
think that could have been better.
Hey, no. That's fine. Thank you. I'm not important. Hopefully the ideas are what's important. So happy to be here. Thank you all for having me. Honored to be here with you all this morning. Yeah, I want to introduce myself quickly before we begin. Greetings, my relatives and my people. I'm from the Nanisht Ejitachitni clan of the Dene Nation. We are also incorrectly known as Navajo, but we call ourselves Dene, which means the people. And that's my first clan, and we get our clans from our mothers. So we get our last names from our mothers, not our fathers in Dene culture. My other clans, which come from my other three grandparents, are Nathane, or Cheyenne, Ashinhe, which is the Salt clan of the Dene, and Bilagana, which is European clans, or in my case, Scottish. Akwat ego Dene as anenishla. Hey, good to see you. Oh, so happy to be here and excited to talk about this. There's actually a lot I want to do. I always want to do more than I actually can do in whatever time they give me. But we're gonna see what happens. So yeah, I think the big thing I came here to talk about today is this notion of human beings as gift to the earth, reclaiming our ecological role. This notion that human beings have been, in some places still are, and certainly all of us could be once again, an asset to the ecosystem around us. That these human hands could actually be a gift, rather than what most of us are taught, right? Which is a curse or a problem, or if all the humans just went away, everything would be okay, right? But the research I was able to do over the past 5 years or so really looked at human systems that were incredibly successful, human systems that were what we are now calling regenerative, meaning every time we touched the earth, we made it better than how we found it. And so I want to go through a few examples of that. And also, as we do that, I want to, at the end, maybe draw some lessons from these food systems that our ancestors created in hopes that it can, give us insight into who we are, each and every one of us. So let's see if this works. Oh, it totally works. So yeah, these are just some pictures from some of the systems. This is I even got the light. All right. The Ahupua'a system of Hawaii, where they used to divide all of their communities into watershed districts prior to Captain Cook's insanity and colonization of Hawaii. The grasslands management with fire, which we see all across Turtle Island prior to Columbus's arrival and prior to the prohibition of indigenous fire. We see this in Bolivia with the floodplain management, where they would manage an area a quarter of the size of Bolivia by managing the floodwaters that came in and out, creating perennial supplies of fish, fruit, escargot, all kinds of amazing food systems. And this alluvial farming strategy, where my people and my neighbors in New Mexico would and still do plant their fields at the base of small watersheds to catch not only the monsoons, harvesting the monsoons in the desert is really important, but also harvesting all of the fertilizers and nutrients that are in the upland soils. So yeah, these are just some of the things of how we have been a gift to the earth and how we have not only not harmed the earth, but made it better. So the first thing I like to talk about often is the chestnuts. The chestnuts, we might not know it, but they were the primary food source for this area and all the way down to Georgia. The whole eastern forests were full of this delicious, nutritious nut. And you see on the right some folks standing next to some old growth chestnuts. You also see on the left Tsalagi family, a Cherokee family, standing next to one of their relatives, one of their chestnut trees. And on the right, you see what chestnuts look like when they're allowed to billow out, when they're allowed to be a tree. But what would happen is when the colonists came in and essentially either murdered or diseased 98% of the native people, the managers, the people who knew how to care for these groves, largely disappeared, not completely, of course, but a good amount of the people power that was used to manage these groves disappeared. And so what happened was all these little nuts that dropped onto the forest floor sprouted more chestnuts, and they become very overcrowded. And they're not allowed to billow out like that tree on the right. They're not allowed to take up space. If you go to a national forest today, all the trees are growing up tall and skinny, fighting for the canopy, right? Because they're so bunched together, fighting for limited nutrients, sunlight, and water. But what the Shawnee ancestors would do, this is a particular study in Kentucky, which is the ancestral homeland of the Shawnee, is they would space the trees through burning. You would space the trees and you would burn in between the trees. And what this does is several things. For one, when you burn the grasslands, the meadow, you keep the meadow a meadow. All the shrubs and saplings that want to dominate the meadow in between are burned out every season. And you also transform the dead grasses that are in the middle of the trees into nutrient-dense ash, which nourishes the soil with nitrogen, phosphorus. The charcoal stimulates soil organic microbial activity in the soil. And this burning also generates nutrient-dense grasslands, which who loves that but deer, elk, buffalo, whatever herbivores are around. So you'd have your mast trees, your nut trees, and your protein in between. So I'm about to show you a little graph of a soil core that was taken out of a Kentucky pond. And this soil core shows us a lot of information. So see that red line all the way to the left is showing 3,000 years ago. Here on the left-hand side is time. And so this whole soil core, the deeper you go into the soil, the older the sediment becomes. So this soil core had 9,500 years worth of information in it. And what we find about 3,000 years ago is chestnut pollen. Oh, this is fossilized pollen. So each of these species, they show the prevalence of that species over time. And so this column is the chestnut column. And you see 3,000 years ago, chestnut makes a very strong presence. Hickory nut as well. And about 2,000 years ago, black walnut comes out of nowhere. You also see some edible plant species coming in, such as sunflower and goosefoot, which were domesticated by indigenous peoples a long time ago in the area. And perhaps most interestingly, on the right-hand side, we see fossilized charcoal come in very strongly. And so scientists interpret this graph to mean that about 3,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Shawnee came in and generated a biodiverse food forest, and not only did that, but sustained it for 3,000 years. And you also see a precipitous decline of chestnut pollen presence, which has to do with the blight. Sadly, the American chestnut is nearly completely extinct because of the mismanagement of these trees and not spacing them far apart, not giving them a place to have as much nutrient, sunlight, and water as they need so that they can have healthy immune system to resist a blight or a fungus. In the 1800s, 1900s, whole valleys of chestnut just died. And so it's very important to understand that these natural systems were not a given. They weren't even natural. They were anthropogenic. They were man-made or woman-made or people-made. So I love to talk about that story to honor the old food system that used to be here before any of our memory really is able to experience. And the technology that is required, the knowledge, TEK knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge that's needed to keep up these systems. Okay, I'm going to go now to another fun thing called a Cacuatl clam garden. So these clam gardens are 3,000 years old also. And what's really beautiful about this system is they noticed the types of habitats that clams would thrive in. This is the Pacific Northwest, by the way, up in Vancouver area. And they created more clam habitat by creating these intertidal rock walls. These are all human rolled stones. You could see one here barely. And what you do when you build this intertidal rock wall is every time the tide comes up and recedes, that wall is going to catch water and sediment behind it and create a calmer pool, warmer water. And they found that these ancient civilizations augmented clam habitat by 35% along Quadra Island. So each of these red dots is where we find clam gardens. So the amount of clam habitat that was generated was massive. And this is just one area. And what's really fascinating about this case study is the way they see the clams, that the clams are seen as equals. They even say the clams have their own nation. And they even say the clams are their relatives. So they treat the clams with the same amount of reverence and respect that any one of us here would treat our own grandmother. There's what they call a kincentric ecology here, where there's a kinship with creation. And so it's 3,000-year-old system. And another important part of this system is that it's not just for humans. You actually would feed the minks, the otters, the birds, and they created these clams not just for themselves, but for the entire ecosystem around them. So they managed to augment not only their own species' health, but the health of everyone around them. Another common feature of indigenous food systems, they're non-human centric. So I like to talk about this because I'm a pyromaniac after this research. The Illinois Confederacy shaped and altered much of this region as an anthropogenic creation. Like many other indigenous groups in North America, their most important tool was fire. Burning the prairies, they made the grasses hospitable for grazers and managed prairie as a game reserve to maximize productivity. So indigenous grasslands pyromanagement really has to do with how we burned nearly every corner of this continent. In fact, if we would look out on the national forest today, we'd be like, wow, that is extremely unkept. Y'all don't know how to burn. And so let me explain the burning a little more. So the grasslands are obviously very important for ungulates, for herbivores. And these grasslands were maintained through routine burning. Burning was so important that the Miamia Nation of the Ohio River Valley has a lunar calendar, and the September moon is called the grass burning moon. So burning was so important and so frequent that we even named one of the full moons after the time to burn. And this is not just unique to the Miamia Nation. This is many nations across what we call Turtle Island. We don't like to call it America because who wants to name a land after a guy who was commissioned to look for people to enslave and gold to extract? That's another story. But across Turtle Island, it was so important to burn that many of our lunar calendars reflected this praxis. The Miamia folks have published some amazing stuff out of Oxford College in Ohio. But anyways, they say, in Sashakayolia Kilswa, or the grass-burning moon, we see fire as something that restores and gives new life to the prairie. Fire helps clear the land of old grass and brush and open seed pods that have fallen to the ground. Because of fire, new flowers and plants emerge in the spring. So fire actually manages to unlock certain seeds that are pyroadapted. It is our heritage as indigenous peoples to burn. We are part and parcel of the land, and in stewarding that land, we are part and parcel with the fire. So perhaps some of us here have heard of biochar, where you want to put charcoal into your gardens, into your soils, which stimulates microbial activity. Because in a single tablespoon of biochar, there is a football field's worth of surface area in all those tiny caverns of the charcoal, of the hollowed out cellular structures of these burnt charcoals. And that is an apartment building for microbes. It also helps filter the water. And so when you burn over generations, we're talking thousands of years of every September the people are burning, you're depositing a little bit of ash every fall. And that ash accumulates, and they have reports of going to Montana and seeing black, loamy topsoils 4 feet deep. And when you burn, you also increase the sponginess of the soil. And this sponginess captures water better, right? It's not just going to run off, but that sponginess increases the water infiltration rate of the soil. So ironically, fire assists in restoring water to the land. Fire assists in bringing water into the water table. Fire assists in recharging the aquifers. And fire, as they say here, allows new flowers and plants to emerge in the spring, meaning because we burned for so many millennia, many plants became adapted. Perhaps some of us here have ever taken echinacea when we're sick. Echinacea is a fire-adapted plant. It loves fire. And it's one of our medicines that we gave to the world, one of many medicines. This book is really wonderful, that I highly recommend. I think I went too far. It's in the left-hand side there, Forgotten Fires. It was written in 1908 by a guy who's probably more obsessed than I am, actually. And it talks all about state by state, different accounts of indigenous peoples burning the land and the effects on soil, the effects on pasturage for buffalo, the effects on biodiversity, and the effects on grasslands health. So on the right-hand side is an area in Texas that was routinely burned for pasture health. But if you go there now, which I did go there recently, it's shrubs. It's all shrubs, and the grassland has been taken over by mesic forests, shrublands. And it's really one of our most endangered ecosystems, is the tall grass prairie. So Smokey the Bear has done a lot to put out our fires, and ironically has created more fires in the process, because another great thing about fire is it prevents big fire. We have good fire, and we have not so good fire. Or as one little kid said the other day, we have scary fire and we have calm fire. So calm fire prevents scary fire. So I'm going to move to the Amazon. So maybe some of you have heard of this technology, technology, where indigenous peoples have essentially created the entire soil system of the Amazon River basin. So on the left-hand side, we see a black, loamy topsoil. And this topsoil is purely anthropogenic. That would not be there if it were not for humans. And underneath is a clay soil. It turns out that Amazonian soils are very poor in terms of nutrients and soil organic matter. You always think of the Amazon as this big, booming, fertile thing. Well, it actually took a lot of work to make it that way. In the middle, we have a guy who's showing off his field, growing different traditional foods. And after that field has been harvested, they will burn it. It becomes fire again. But they also have a lot of creative inputs, putting a lot of old termite piles, crop residues, intercropping, also putting in their their clay pottery into the soil. After their pottery is done and it's broken, they'll actually bury it in the soil, and that will help with water retention, aeration. So they have this whole soil technology, and this particular nation is one of them that does it. It's called the Mebengokre or Kayapo peoples, and they also call it Amazonian dark earths. So every one of these black dots, we find Amazonian dark earths. And these are all anthropogenic soils, right? And if you look at this square, it's like a pretty big chunk of South America, right? Like, these people were not doing little composting piles. These people were shaping the Amazon rainforest as we know it. And that's what I love to think about, is just the sheer scale with which indigenous peoples influence the land. And all of our ancestors, actually. There's similar stories in Norway, throughout Africa, throughout Asia, throughout Australia, the Pacific Islands. This is not just a Native American thing. This is a human thing, whereby we actually had incredible influence over the world around us in a positive way. So one of the things I've tried to call this is indigenous regenerative ecosystem design, where we are actually designing ecosystems. And I could go on and on. This is just 4 case studies. There's literally just dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of these really fascinating food systems and land management systems that without human beings, they wouldn't have existed. And so again, these human hands can be an asset. These human hands can be a gift. I like to talk a little bit about how we have a heritage to actually fulfill our purpose as a gift and as an emissary. I want to talk about this idea that the Yoruba word for human being, Yoruba is a West African language. The Yoruba word for human being means the chosen one. And it's not to say, oh, humans are so important, they're chosen to be above all creation. It means they're chosen to steward the earth. They were assigned this role. They were assigned this duty to steward the earth. And if you look at all these indigenous case studies I talk about, every single one of these nations, if you look at the literature, say, Creator put us here to protect this area, this Chesapeake Bay, this Quadra Island Bay, this mountain range. This is our purview, you know. And so I really do believe that our human brains and our human opposable thumbs were not given to us so we could enslave everything, right? They were given to us so we could care for everything. And I think that is what we're all trying to remember and get back to. And these human brains and these human thumbs are similar to like a parent and a child. Obviously, the parent is much more intelligent, you could say, although that's arguable, but much more powerful, much more able, much more mobility in society, right? But that doesn't mean the parent was given all these gifts so that they could enslave their kid, right? We're given all these gifts so we could care for the kid. And I think the same applies to our connection to the earth, that everything we have is for us to give, not to take. And so I want to talk a little bit about the difference between human hardware and human software. The hardware is this body, right? We all have this body. And the software is our worldview, our consciousness, the program with which we operate by, the program that determines our behavior. And so I argue this is not the problem. The human being is not the problem. It's just that we've been equipped with poor software. Sometimes we have a virus in our computer, right? This virus of greed, this virus of fear. And that indigenous peoples have an incredible software. And I believe that every single one of us, no matter what color skin we have, no matter what language we speak, come from indigenous roots. And as a part European woman, I had to find those indigenous roots as well, those Scottish roots that were similarly tried to be destroyed. When the British Empire went into Scotland, they would find the storytellers first, the bards, and they would kill them first, and they would bury them face down. So their stories would die with them. So these stories, why did they go after the bards? Why did Queen Elizabeth order that every Celtic harpist be hung? What do they got against these harpists and the bards? Because they have this. They have the software in the songs. The songs teach us how to relate to the earth. The songs teach us how to relate to each other. And the songs teach us how to be good stewards of our mother. So some of the software of indigenous peoples is about giving, this metaphor of the bird bath. You know, what is a bird bath? A bird bath is a simple gift from a human being to a bird. And the human doesn't get anything from it, right? We put a bird bath in our front yard. We're not really like capitalizing on anything or benefiting. We might see a bird, but it's a love letter to the birds. It's a love letter to creation. And if we think about, let's see if I can get back, this bird bath, that's a pretty cool bird bath, right? It's a clam bath. But the notion is that this is a very big gift to the earth, and that I think it is our task to remember how to create bird baths at scale, if you will, and bring these love letters back to the earth, and to find and exercise our power as Homo sapiens to be a gift. And we often think about the human population as a problem, right? 8 billion people. Is it 8 billion now? Or is it probably 9 by now? I don't know. Oh, there's too many humans, right? And we're so upset that all these creatures are crawling around the earth. When in fact, if we were equipped with the proper software, that population problem could become a population asset. Because if every one of these 8 billion people were operating to bring life to the earth, think of all that people power could do to heal the tissues, the blood, the lungs of the earth, as we have proven to have done many times before. So yeah, this is the software of indigenous food systems as I see it. Respect, reverence, reciprocity, responsibility, relationality, or being kin with everything around you, and bioequality, this notion that we are equal to all things. And this is really the software that we are all in this room that we all carry, but we have to really take back our bodies and our cultures and our societies from these corporations that have essentially hijacked us. And we have to take back our power. Let's see what else I have. I guess that's it. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. And I actually do have a song I could share. It's about 5 minutes, but I also could not. Okay. I got the green light. Okay. Okay. Indigenous people, shine your light, we are equal, yeah, yeah. I remember the days when our prayers were illegal. I remember the days when being Indian was lethal, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had a rough past, but get ready for the sequel. Get ready for the glorious comeback of our people, yeah. Rise up, all you warriors of love, all you answers to the prayers of our ancestors from above. I could feel it in my heart, can you feel it in your blood? I could hear the seventh fire calling us to wake up. All nations rise, rise up, 'cause now's your time. We don't have to hide anymore, 'cause now's our time. All nations rise, rise up, 'cause now's your time. We don't have to hide anymore, 'cause now's our time. With forgiveness as my bow and my prayers as my arrows, pull it back and let go. I watch them fly like sparrows. Have hope, have hope. With compassion as my shield and faith down to my marrow, I will walk the pollen path even when it gets narrow. Yeah, yeah. Resurrect. Yes, you can bet that we seen the single mama raising children on the res. We seen domestic violence tear apart what we have left. We seen the alcohol take it all and leave us dead. We've seen the children take their own lives when they can't take the dread anymore. No, we can't take the dread anymore. Or no, I won't take the dread anymore. 'Cause I can't stand the dread anymore. Yes, it's a war, but we seen it all before, and now we know we can change it, 'cause that's why we were born. We know we are the ones that we have been waiting for. Yes, we are the ones that Grandma has been praying for. So rise up, all you warriors of love, all you answers to the prayers of our ancestors from above. I could feel it in my heart. Can you feel it in your blood? I could hear the seventh fire calling us to wake up. Pueblo hermoso, levántanse, es nuestro tiempo. No tienes que esconderte más, porque ahorita es nuestro tiempo. This next verse is in Spanish to honor all the indigenous peoples who live south of that imaginary border that has divided a continent that was once very much connected. Mujer indígena, tú eres tan sagrada y traigas medicina de tu suelo todavía. A pesar del abuso de tu cuerpo y tu tierra, respetamos tus ancestros y la suya cultura, hombre indígena. Tú eres honorable y yo veo la fuerza que todavía sobrevive. A pesar del abuso de tu raza venerable, yo respeto tus ritos, tus danzas, tus padres, guerreros del amor y guerreros de la paz. Sí, no vamos a escondernos más. We are warriors of love. We are warriors of peace. And we will not hide ourselves anymore. All nations rise, rise up, 'cause now's your time. We don't have to hide anymore, 'cause now's our time. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Honored. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
As my Muslim friends say, alhamdulillah. All praise to God.
Thank you so much, Lyla. Thank you. Woo. Thank you.